When Wyatt Coleman got fined $500 for fishing on the very lake his grandfather carved out with his bare hands, he didn't argue. He vanished for 3 weeks, then came back with deeds, maps, and a locked steel gate that left the entire HOA gasping. The early morning sun hung low over the hills of Mill Creek Falls, casting a pale golden shimmer across Halcyon Lake. Wyatt Coleman stood at the edge of his rickety dock, coffee steaming in one hand and a fishing rod in the other. The lake was calm, almost sacred, reflecting the dense pines that hugged its shoreline like old friends. This had been his sanctuary since childhood, a place of quiet, of memory, and most importantly, of freedom. His late father, Tom Coleman, taught him how to cast lines and skip stones here. It was where he came to feel close to the man who'd raised him with grit, love, and no tolerance for injustice. Wyatt had moved back a year ago after leaving the chaos of the city and the aftermath of a failed marriage. Life had taken a toll. His work as a carpenter was steady but solitary, and his past as a veteran still echoed through sleepless nights. The lake had been his therapy, unspoiled, undisturbed, until recently. It started subtly, new homes popping up along the eastern shore, oversized and sterile, with glass balconies and artificial turf. Then came the signs, "Private access, HOA members only." Wyatt scoffed at them. His land wasn't part of any homeowners association. The Coleman property had stood since 1912, long before Halcyon Heights HOA had even existed. He paid his own taxes, maintained his own road, and didn't owe anybody a damn thing. But it didn't matter to people like Brent Whitmore, the tech mogul turned developer who bought up most of the land around Halcyon Lake. What Whitmore couldn't buy, he tried to control. He made promises to the new residents about exclusive lake rights, luxury amenities, and preserving property values. To Wyatt, it all sounded like code for erasing history. That morning, just as he reeled in a modest bass, a white speedboat cut across the water, its engine humming like a mechanical warning. Bold black letters along the side read, "Halcyon Heights Lake Patrol." Wyatt squinted as the boat neared his dock. A man in a neon vest and mirrored sunglasses leaned forward. "Good morning, sir. Do you have a permit to fish on this lake?" Wyatt furrowed his brow. "A permit? To fish on my own damn lake?" "This section falls within the shared use area of Halcyon Heights," the man replied, holding out a clipboard. "Fishing here without HOA authorization is a violation. You're being cited." Wyatt looked down at the paper. A fine, $500. For fishing on the water his great-grandfather had once dug trenches beside to control runoff. The man might as well have slapped him in the face. He let the bass go. It plopped back into the water with a splash that sounded like betrayal. "You tell Whitmore," Wyatt said quietly, "that this isn't over." The patrol boat turned and roared away, leaving waves that rocked the dock under his boots. Wyatt stood still, fists clenched. The air smelled like pine and insult. Inside the cabin, dust caught the morning light as it drifted across old photographs. His father holding fish the size of dogs. His grandfather with a pickaxe beside the lake's earliest edge. Wyatt sat down at the wooden table and placed the citation beside a worn deed bound in cracked leather. He stared at the fine, then at a rusted lockbox under the bench. He opened it slowly. Inside were maps, boundary markers, a tape recorder, and the original surveying contracts from 1937. They thought he was just a carpenter, a fisherman, a man with nothing but old stories and older tools. They were wrong. 3 days passed without incident, but Wyatt wasn't just waiting, he was watching. Every morning he sat on his porch with a thermos of black coffee and binoculars, studying the lake and the movements of the people, now claiming ownership of something they never earned. He noted every patrol boat launch, every new camera mounted on a neighboring dock, every HOA contractor staking orange flags into the soil. They weren't just building fences, they were drawing invisible lines of dominance. In town, he kept a low profile, but he began collecting information. At the county records office, he pulled up every zoning map, land transfer, and boundary adjustment made in the last 10 years. The clerk, an older woman named Sheila, whom Wyatt remembered from high school, squinted at him as he rolled out a map across the counter. "You planning on suing someone?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Not yet," Wyatt said, running a finger along the curved edge of Halcyon Lake. "But someone's been selling something they don't actually own." What Wyatt discovered was infuriating. Several parcels surrounding the lake had been rezoned under suspicious circumstances. It looked legal on the surface, but deeper inspection revealed multiple filings that had been digitally notarized, using a license from a long-retired county official, fake authorizations, forged boundaries, and none of it included the Coleman property. His 18-acre wedge of land wrapped along the west bank like a bent elbow, and its historical title clearly stated exclusive access to the water adjacent to it. That meant that HOA patrol boat had not only trespassed, they had issued an illegal fine. By Thursday, Wyatt had spoken to 2 attorneys. The first told him it wasn't worth the fight unless he had deep pockets. The second was different. Her name was Callie Monroe, sharp, no nonsense, and with a personal vendetta against HOAs after one had tried to foreclose on her father's home for planting tomatoes. "I'll take the case," she said after reviewing his documents. "But I'll do it my way, quietly. You don't go picking a fight with snakes. You build a fire and let them crawl in on their own." Wyatt liked her immediately. She was younger than him by at least a decade, but carried herself with unshakable confidence. He gave her copies of everything, the maps, the deed, even an old tape of his father explaining the history of the land. Callie's eyes lit up as she listened. "We may not just be dealing with zoning violations," she said. "This is potentially a federal case, fraud, misrepresentation, even RICO if they coordinated." That night, Wyatt walked the perimeter of his land with a lantern, placing new markers and photographing them. He dug up the old cornerstones his grandfather buried, thick slabs of granite engraved with a C and a date, and re-cemented them into place. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, and he stood there silently, feeling something rise in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. They thought he was just a lonely man with a fishing rod and a log cabin. But Wyatt had the one thing they underestimated most: history. And history, real, documented, blood-soaked history, was about to speak. The following week, the air around Halcyon Lake grew tense, like the heavy stillness before a summer storm. Wyatt kept a low profile, but the HOA did not. They escalated. On Monday morning, he woke to the sound of tires crunching gravel. A shiny black SUV with the HOA logo stenciled on the side idled at the edge of his driveway. 2 men in polo shirts and earpieces stepped out. One carried a clipboard, the other a drone controller. Wyatt met them halfway down the path, arms crossed over his flannel. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked coolly. "We're performing an environmental inspection," the taller one said. Several HOA residents have reported illegal runoff and unauthorized shoreline modifications on this property. Wyatt laughed without humor. "This property isn't under your authority. You're trespassing." The shorter man clicked the drone controller, and the small quadcopter zipped up into the air, scanning the lake's edge. "We'll be submitting a report," he said, scribbling something without looking up. "You'll be hearing from us again." Wyatt didn't answer. He watched them go, the drone still buzzing overhead like an angry wasp. When they left, he took out his phone and sent Callie the footage from his security camera. Her reply came 5 minutes later. "They just broke 3 privacy laws and a Fourth Amendment violation. I'll file an injunction." That night, Wyatt sat at his father's old workbench and opened the metal lockbox again. He removed a weathered envelope addressed to "Whomever fights for this land next." Inside were 10 photographs, all black and white, showing Wyatt's grandfather and great-uncle laying pipe, digging trenches, and placing boundary stones at precise GPS points, years before such tech even existed. Taped to the back of one photo was a letter from a 1950s land surveyor confirming the water rights granted exclusively to the Coleman family for perpetual, unshared, riparian usage. It was a golden bullet. The next morning, Callie filed a cease and desist order. She also submitted a motion to suspend all HOA enforcement on Wyatt's property pending review of the documents. But the HOA retaliated faster than anyone expected. On Wednesday, Wyatt returned from town to find a bright orange notice stapled to a tree near his dock. Unsafe structure, access denied, pending demolition. His dock, his family's dock, built by his grandfather, repaired every year by Wyatt himself. He stood there, fists trembling, staring at the paper. They weren't just playing dirty now. They were trying to erase him. He called Callie, voice low and tight. "They're going after the dock now." "Let them," she said. "Just keep documenting. And whatever you do, don't react. You're winning the war. They just don't know it yet." Wyatt hung up and walked the length of the dock, slowly, one board at a time. He remembered the feel of his father's hand steadying him as a child, his first cast into the water, the summer his dog Scout jumped off the edge chasing dragonflies. They could staple signs to trees, but they couldn't touch memory. He picked up his camera and began filming everything, the signs, the waterline, the location of every granite boundary marker, and then he recorded a message. A personal message, for the court, for the world, for whoever needed to know that some men don't give up what their fathers bled to keep. "My name is Wyatt Coleman," he said into the lens, standing at the end of the dock. "And this lake doesn't belong to Halcyon Heights. It belongs to history, and I intend to prove it." Rain fell steadily the next morning, painting the lake in thousands of ripples and veiling the woods in mist. Wyatt sat by the window, watching droplets trail down the glass as he replayed the footage from his camera again and again. The dock, the illegal citation, the drone, the trespassers, it was all there. But evidence wasn't enough. He knew these types. They didn't fear paper trails. They buried them. Callie called just after 9 a.m. Her voice was tight, almost breathless. "They filed an emergency motion with the county board," she said. "They're trying to get a demolition permit for your dock fast-tracked. No hearings, no appeals." Wyatt clenched his jaw. "When?" "By Friday. We've got 48 hours to respond. And I need one more thing. Proof that the lake bed itself is partially deeded to your property." "I'll find it," he said, already grabbing his jacket. He knew exactly where to look. The attic of the cabin was more like a museum, filled with his grandfather's journals, maps, and receipts dating back to the 1930s. Dust floated in the air as he climbed up, ducking beneath wooden beams and crawling through boxes marked in faded ink. In the bottom of a cedar chest wrapped in wax paper, he found it, a leather-bound ledger titled Water and Rights. Inside, he flipped past pages of rainfall logs, fish population notes, and finally, there it was. A hand-drawn map from 1953 with a signature by a county hydrologist confirming a land use grant. Scribbled at the bottom in tight cursive, includes subsurface mineral and partial lake bed rights as grandfathered by Riparian Act Section 8B. He scanned the entire thing and emailed it to Callie. Her response came 2 minutes later. "That's it. That's what we needed. Wyatt, you may have just won this thing." For the first time in weeks he allowed himself a breath, but it didn't last. By afternoon, a pickup truck bearing the HOA logo rolled up with 2 contractors in reflective vests and hard hats. One of them began pacing along the dock with a measuring wheel while the other took photos. Wyatt stepped out, phone recording. "You're trespassing again," he said calmly. "This is HOA jurisdiction," the man replied, not even looking up. Wyatt took a step forward. "This is private land. You've been given notice. Any further presence here is criminal trespass, and you will be prosecuted." The man stopped. For the first time he looked Wyatt in the eye, and this time there was hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty. Wyatt didn't blink. "I've got maps, deeds, and now a lawyer who's not afraid of your money," he said. "Leave." They packed up without another word. That evening, Wyatt and Callie met in person at a quiet diner off the highway. She slid a folder across the table. The injunction's been filed. I've also subpoenaed the HOA's land acquisition documents. If they forged anything, we'll find it." He nodded slowly. "They're panicking, aren't they?" Callie smiled for the first time. "They are. You just turned the hunter into the hunted?" Outside, the rain finally stopped. Wyatt stepped out and looked up at the clearing sky, the air sharp with the scent of wet pine. The fight was far from over, but for the first time he wasn't just defending his land. He was reclaiming it. By the time Friday rolled around, the town courthouse was more crowded than usual. Wyatt arrived early, dressed in a dark flannel shirt tucked into clean jeans, boots polished. He sat in the third row behind Callie, who was flipping through a tabbed binder thicker than most law books. Across the aisle, 3 HOA representatives sat stiffly in their suits, whispering to each other and glancing nervously toward a silver-haired man in the front. Brent Whitmore himself. The billionaire developer had come in person. That meant only one thing: they were afraid. The judge, a lean woman in her 60s with sharp glasses and a reputation for impartiality, entered the room and called the case. The matter was listed as Emergency Motion for Demolition Permit. Halcyon Heights HOA versus Wyatt Coleman. Whitmore's lawyer, a smug man named Lyle Denshaw, rose first. He spoke eloquently, referencing zoning maps, community interest, safety concerns, and the urgent need to protect the aesthetic integrity of Halcyon Lake. He called Wyatt's dock structurally compromised and visually disruptive. Callie let him finish, never flinching. Then she stood. "Your Honor, the HOA's argument hinges on jurisdiction it does not possess. My client's land was never part of Halcyon Heights. What's more, we have historical documentation showing exclusive riparian rights dating back 3 generations, including partial ownership of the lake bed and the legal right to maintain personal infrastructure such as his dock." She passed forward the scanned documents, the hand-drawn maps, and the hydrologist's letter. Then she played a 30-second clip from Wyatt's security camera showing the HOA's unauthorized drone flights and contractors trespassing on private property. A silence settled in the courtroom. Even Whitmore looked uneasy. The judge adjusted her glasses and peered over the papers. "These documents appear meticulous and compelling. Mr. Coleman, did you know the Lake's deed and the Riparian Act terms this precisely?" "Yes, Your Honor," Wyatt said, his voice steady. "My father taught me every word of it." After a long pause, the judge delivered her ruling. "The demolition request is denied. Furthermore, I am issuing a temporary restraining order preventing the HOA from engaging in any enforcement action on Mr. Coleman's land until a full investigation is completed." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Whitmore whispered something harsh to his lawyer. Callie packed her binder with calm efficiency, but the gleam in her eye was unmistakable. As they exited the courthouse, a local reporter jogged over. "Mr. Coleman, is it true you're the only homeowner on Halcyon Lake not part of the HOA?" "I'm not a homeowner," Wyatt replied. "I'm a land steward. And they've been trespassing on something they never had a right to touch." The clip aired that night on regional news, and Wyatt's phone buzzed nonstop for hours. Messages poured in from people all over the state. Former landowners, small farmers, retirees, some angry, some grateful. But the real shock came 2 days later. Callie called him on a Sunday morning, voice electric with tension. "You might want to sit down." "I'm standing by the lake. They forged signatures on at least 3 zoning applications," she said. "We traced them. The notary used retired 5 years before those filings were submitted." Wyatt didn't move. "That's criminal," he said quietly. "Yes," Callie confirmed, "and it gets worse. 2 parcels they sold to HOA members were technically still in litigation from a previous landowner. They've been selling stolen property." The full scope of the fraud was unraveling. Not just a personal attack against Wyatt, but an entire scheme built on lies. He looked out at the water. The surface was calm, the trees swaying in the wind. The lake had always kept its secrets. But now it was finally speaking through him. In the following days, Halcyon Lake no longer felt like the peaceful sanctuary it had once been. It felt like a chessboard, and Wyatt Coleman had just declared check. But while the HOA scrambled to respond, Wyatt quietly prepared for the next move. He knew that victory wasn't just about defending the dock or the fine. It was about exposing the entire rotten foundation beneath Whitmore's empire. On Tuesday morning, Wyatt drove out to an address Callie had given him, the home of Harold Greaves, a retired county surveyor in his 80s who once worked on the original lake mapping project. Greaves lived alone in a modest farmhouse cluttered with maps, coffee mugs, and dusty blueprints rolled up like ancient scrolls. "I remember your granddad," Harold said after Wyatt explained who he was. "Hell of a man. Wouldn't let the county cut corners when it came to this lake." Wyatt showed him the documents. Harold leaned over them with trembling fingers and squinted hard. "These signatures right here?" he said, pointing to 3 land swap forms stamped in 2009. "Not mine. That's not how I signed my G." "You're sure?" "Son, I'm old, not dead. That's forgery, and bad forgery, too." Harold offered to write and sign a sworn statement. Wyatt thanked him and left, heart pounding. That was the final nail. Real people. Real fraud. And now, real consequences. Back at the cabin, Wyatt installed new locks and mounted 2 solar-powered cameras on trees facing the lake. If they dared return, he'd record every second. But something unexpected happened instead. The neighbors started talking. It began with a knock on his door one morning. A middle-aged man in a windbreaker stood there awkwardly, holding a thermos and a pie. "Name's Gary," he said. "I bought a place up the hill last year. I didn't know what the HOA was doing to you. Some of us didn't vote for this." Wyatt invited him in. They talked. Then came a young couple 2 cabins down. Then an elderly woman who had been fined for planting sunflowers. By the end of the week, 9 residents had shown up, all disillusioned with the HOA's aggressive tactics and manipulative leadership. Callie helped them organize a petition to dissolve the board, and though the road ahead would be long, the tide had unmistakably turned. And then on Friday, the unexpected arrived by helicopter. Wyatt heard the rotor blades before he saw it. A sleek black chopper descended onto the HOA clubhouse lawn across the lake. Out stepped 2 men in dark suits with Department of Justice badges clipped to their belts. The next morning, it was all over the news. Federal investigation launched into Halcyon Heights HO fraud scandal. Developer Brent Whitmore under scrutiny for real estate racketeering. Wyatt sat on his porch, stunned. The lake glistened in the early light. He hadn't even had time to process it when his phone rang. It was Callie, and she sounded breathless. "The DOJ saw the file I sent. They're sending auditors. Whitmore's facing criminal charges. And Wyatt, listen to this. The state attorney general is requesting a freeze on all HOA operations in Halcyon Heights." He leaned back, finally exhaling. "And the lake?" he asked. She paused, then smiled through the phone. "It's yours now, fully and legally. They can't touch it." Wyatt's eyes welled unexpectedly, but he didn't fight the feeling. After everything, the threats, the fines, the trespassing, the humiliation, he hadn't just reclaimed what was his. He had protected something sacred, something irreplaceable. And justice, real justice, was finally catching up with those who thought they could steal history with a signature. The days that followed felt surreal. Federal investigators began interviewing witnesses, collecting documents, and seizing digital records from the Halcyon Heights HOA offices. Brent Whitmore had vanished from public view, his lawyers issuing sterile denials, while reporters camped outside the gated neighborhoods he once ruled like a king. Meanwhile, Wyatt's quiet cabin became an unexpected symbol of resistance. His story went viral after a local journalist posted the security footage of the HOA harassing him, combined with a clip of his calm but powerful courtroom statement. Comments flooded in from across the country. Farmers, veterans, widows, teachers, all echoing the same message. They tried the same thing to me. It was bigger than just a lake now. On a crisp Sunday morning, Wyatt stood at the edge of his dock with a hammer in hand. The unsafe structure notice still fluttered in the wind, stapled there by the HOA weeks ago. He yanked it off and drove a new sign into the wooden post. Private property, no trespassing, Coleman Legacy Land. That same day, Gary, the neighbor who brought the pie, returned, this time with a half-dozen other residents. They carried folding chairs and thermoses, children running between them. "We figured if the lake's free now," Gary said, "we'd like to fish with the guy who made it possible." Wyatt didn't say much. He just handed over a few rods and a tackle box. By sunset, lines were cast across the water like strings connecting what had been broken. For the first time in months, Wyatt laughed. It wasn't a bitter or hollow sound, it was real. But the moment of peace didn't last long. At dusk, a black SUV rolled slowly down the gravel road to his property. Wyatt's hand instinctively went to his belt, not for a weapon, but for his phone. The door opened. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, blazer, clipboard. "I'm Amanda Keyes," she said, offering a tight smile. "Federal Land Bureau." Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "More paperwork?" "Actually," she said, handing him a folder. "More good news." Inside were 3 documents. The first, a formal declaration confirming his full legal ownership of the lake bed adjacent to his land. The second, a letter from the state attorney general offering support in any future civil suits. And the third, he had to reread twice. It was an offer. The state wanted to purchase access rights to part of his shoreline, for conservation, not development. In exchange, they would help him legally protect the land as a private ecological preserve. He could keep it. Forever. And no HOA, no corporation, no future buyer could ever override that protection. Wyatt looked up at her, stunned. "You're saying they can't ever try this again?" She nodded. "Not without breaking state law. You've won, Mr. Coleman. For real this time." As she drove away, Wyatt stood alone in the twilight, folder pressed against his chest. He looked out at the lake, now glowing in the fading amber light. He whispered to no one, and yet to generations before him. "We kept it safe, Dad." Behind him, laughter echoed from the neighbors gathered by the fire pit. The dock creaked under light footsteps. A little girl named Abby held up a fish she'd caught with a proud grin. "Mr. Wyatt, look what I got!" He knelt beside her, eyes warm. "That's a beauty," he said. "You ever clean one before?" She shook her head. He showed her how. That night, under a sky full of stars, Wyatt Coleman realized he had done more than reclaim a piece of land. He had reclaimed a way of life. Autumn came fast to Mill Creek Falls. The trees around Halcyon Lake ignited in brilliant colors. Fiery reds, deep oranges, sunlit golds. Morning mist drifted off the water like breath from the earth itself. The air was cooler now, sharper, but Wyatt Coleman had never felt warmer inside. For the first time in years, his mornings were quiet in the best way. No patrol boats, no warning signs, no trespassing forms tacked to trees. Just birdsong, the hum of coffee brewing, and the familiar creak of his dock under real footsteps. By now, the news had reached far beyond their little town. National outlets ran headlines like, "Veteran wins land battle against HOA giant," and "One man's lake legacy brings down corrupt developer." People wrote him letters, some asking for advice, others just thanking him for not backing down. Wyatt responded to every single one, handwriting them at night by the cabin window under a lamp his father once fixed. Meanwhile, the legal consequences for Brent Whitmore and the HOA board escalated quickly. Federal charges were filed for fraud, wire tampering, conspiracy, and obstruction. Several members agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency, exposing years of shady land grabs and illegal fines issued across multiple states. Whitmore himself was indicted by a grand jury and released on a staggering bond. He tried to make public statements, but no one believed him anymore. What surprised Wyatt most wasn't Whitmore's downfall. It was how many of his neighbors turned out to be allies once fear was gone. Gary and his wife organized weekend lake cleanups. The elderly woman with the sunflower vines, Mrs. Heller, started a garden on her lot again, with Wyatt helping her build raised beds from salvaged cedar. The young couple, Mark and Tasha, invited him over every other Sunday for dinner. People weren't just returning to the land, they were reclaiming community. Then one Saturday morning, something happened that no one expected. The county held a public ceremony on Wyatt's land, a celebration of its new designation as a protected private conservation area. A modest crowd gathered by the dock. There were kids with painted faces, homemade cookies, local press, and a wooden plaque covered with a cloth. When the mayor took the mic, he smiled nervously. Wyatt didn't ask for this. In fact, he told us not to make a big deal about it. But what he did here, standing up not just for himself, but for all of us, is worth honoring. They pulled the cloth off the plaque. It read, Coleman Lake Preserve, established 2023, in memory of those who protect what cannot be replaced. Wyatt stood frozen. His heart slammed once, hard against his ribs. The crowd applauded, but he didn't hear them. His eyes were locked on the word memory. It wasn't just a victory for him. It was for his father, his grandfather, and every moment they had shared on this water. Afterward, a little girl ran up to him, tugging at his sleeve. It was Abby again. Mr. Wyatt, does this mean you own the whole lake forever? He knelt beside her, smiling gently. No, honey, he said. It means the lake owns us now. We just promised to take care of it. That night, under the stars, neighbors gathered around a fire pit built from river stones. They laughed, shared food, and fished until the moon rose high. Wyatt sat in a wooden chair carved by his own hands, watching it all unfold. He wasn't just alone on the edge of a lake anymore. He was surrounded by people who remembered what it meant to belong somewhere. The lake was quiet again, but this time it wasn't hiding anything. It was full of stories, old and new, and they were safe. And so was he. In my view, the ending of this story captures something rare and deeply moving, a quiet, earned triumph that doesn't come from revenge or spectacle, but from integrity, legacy, and perseverance. Wyatt Coleman didn't fight to dominate anyone. He fought to protect something sacred, something rooted in family, memory, and land. That's what makes the ending so powerful, not just that he won, but how he won. He didn't destroy the HOA with force. He unraveled them with truth. He didn't isolate himself in bitterness. Instead, he created connection, invited people in, and unintentionally led a movement that brought healing to an entire community. What I love most is that the lake, once a battleground, becomes a sanctuary again, not just for Wyatt, but for everyone who learns what real stewardship means. And that final line, where he tells the little girl that the lake owns them now, it's the perfect expression of humility and respect for something larger than ourselves. This is a story of resistance, yes, but more than that, it's a story of reclamation, of land, of voice, of belonging. It reminds us that sometimes the greatest revolutions happen quietly, one dock, one truth, one act of courage at a time.